Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's masterclass. If you're new here, our masterclasses are free events where you can come prepared to learn about specific topics from some of our favorite experts. My name is Hiba Abdullahi. I'm the social media manager here, and I'm going to be moderating this amazing talk that we have. For those of you who are new to the Mom Project, we are a digital talent marketplace and community where you can realize your full potential. Through our marketplace, we connect you with job opportunities at family-friendly companies that allow you to thrive at work and at home. And through our amazing community, we provide you with the support, tools, and all the things you need to move forward in your working journey. I have my two teammates here working behind the scenes, Katie and Jennifer, so I'm so thankful for them. And I'm going to introduce you today to our masterclass, which is all about professional identity and intersectionality. Um, and I'm so excited for these two experts that are going to get us started. I want to introduce Ashley Ritter. She serves as the principal consultant at Chicago Career Consulting and brings nearly 15 years of experience across a variety of sectors and disciplines, including career coaching, human resources, nonprofit management, healthcare, and higher education. And we have Mariah Johnson. I love this because she believes that finding the right career path is a personal pursuit and begins at looking at oneself. I totally agree. She's applied this process to herself, and 5 years ago, she switched her career path. She now holds a master in public policy and a master in sociology, and is currently pursuing her PhD. I love seeing Black girls win. She's an equity and identity consultant at Chicago Career Consulting as well. Ladies, thank you for joining us today, and jump us right into the presentation.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having us. We're both very excited to be here, to be talking about a topic that Ashley even said yesterday, this topic feels like a calling. So we're very passionate about this topic, and we're excited to have this dialogue with you. Before we get started, we wanted to, given the topic, given the space that we're in, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge what happened this week. If you can go to the next slide. The 8 people whose lives were ended by white supremacy, by violence, by white terrorism, 6 of whom were Asian women. And we just want to acknowledge that our intersectional identities and how we show up at work matters. And the fact that they were just in their place of work, trying to make a living and do what mattered to them, and their lives were ended. We just want to acknowledge that. So if we can take a quick moment of silence, and if you wouldn't mind joining us. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in that moment. And hopefully may we never forget these lives that were lost this week. Before we get started, I want to outline what we expect to cover today, what you can expect from us, what questions and answers we'll be tackling. First and foremost, defining and providing the historical context for professionalism, this concept of intersectionality, of which I love intersectionality. That's one of my areas of interest. How intersectionality can be built into the workplace and the importance of that and what that looks like or what it can look like. And then the realities of the workplace. There are restrictions and policies that aren't always accepting of our intersectional identities, and how that incorporates and works with privilege and power. And then lastly, building towards a new reality, redefining professionalism for yourself, which may mean throwing away the concept entirely. And we'll get into that. But before we get into all of that, we want to kind of introduce ourselves. Who are we? Have already shared a bit about me. I am a PhD student in sociology at Loyola University Chicago. I'm also an equity and identity consultant. Ashley asked me to join the team this year, and I'm really happy to be in a part of the Chicago Career Consulting team. As far as my research interest, I'm very interested in how we can rework this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion so that it's meaningful, so that it actually helps those that are most impacted by these type of policies. I'm interested in how we measure diversity, intersectional theory, and other Black feminisms and Black feminist theories. And then I'm particularly interested in the higher education context. So a lot of my research focuses on that context. Beyond my professional identities, I'm also a part of a family. So I wanted to share a bit about my family and who I am beyond those professional identities.
And I'm just going to interrupt for one moment. We're having just a few challenges with the slides every now and again. So thanks for your patience when that happens. The next picture is so great. So keep going, Mariah.
No worries. Thanks, Ashley, for running the slides in the first place. Like I said, I'm a part of family. I'm one of 7 kids. Since we're at the Mom Project, it seems appropriate to acknowledge my amazing mom. I'm a product of a wonderful mother. She homeschooled us for 7 years. She's this creative, brilliant energy and life force, and she runs her own nonprofit. So I want to acknowledge her in this space. And then also, as you can see, oh, cool, the pictures, the newest member of our family, my nephew, Judah, who we're all just really in love with and obsessed with. And I just feel like, his picture should be shown everywhere. So of course, I'm going to share pictures of him in this space too. So thank you for allowing me to be here as an auntie, as a member of the Johnson family, and then all my various other identities as well. Ashley.
Great. Thanks so much, Mariah. And, I actually am not sure why we keep having trouble with the slides. So sorry, everyone. I'm having trouble again. So actually, while I'm doing this, I may ask if one of the folks with the Mom Project may be able to open up the slides on your end. Let me know if that works for you all while I share a little bit about myself here. Give me one moment. Let's see if we can get this to work again. Thanks everyone for a moment. Okay, looks like that you all are gonna, great. Let's see, I think Mariah is going to take over the slide. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just see if we can resolve this issue for us. Thanks everyone for your patience while we do that. So let's see. A little bit about me. I'll go ahead and get started while you're pulling the slides up. So I'm Ashley Ritter, and I'm our principal consultant here at Chicago Career Consulting. And look, here's my slide. It's coming. There it is. Okay, great. So I've been in the career and leadership space for close to 15 years, over 15 years. I carry a master's in organizational leadership, and I've been in a variety of different backgrounds, all the way from working with executive leaders to higher education, healthcare, nonprofit. And really a lot of these places have a lot of what I found over the years is I continue to work on some similar themes, and some of those themes are areas of burnout. Actually, if we can go to the previous slide. Areas of burnout. I work with a lot of folks who are dealing with toxic workplaces, people needing a career change, or people who feel really stuck. And part of why I started Chicago Career Consulting is because I think so many of us care about connecting our purpose and our meaning somehow to what we do in our work during the day, or finding a way to connect that. And so that's a lot of what we help people do. And so the next slide is very important, and I saw it coming through. Let's see, there we go. Okay, and of course, since we're at the Mom Project, we're all about the babies. I got to share my babies with you. So these are my 2 kiddos. So when I am not busy doing a presentation or researching or working with clients, I am cleaning up the spills. I am leaning over and fixing the yellow purses like I am in that picture. And so just like all of you, I am trying to keep it moving every day. So I thought I would share that little bit with you as well. As we get into the next slide here, I think I'd be curious to hear what made you decide to come here today. And so feel free to go ahead and share in the chat. And from what I understand, there's a bit of a delay in the chat. So go ahead and share it. In a few moments, we might get to see some of what you're sharing. But go ahead and share in the chat. What made you decide to come here? What are you hoping to learn today? Share one question you're hoping to think about. And the reason I bring this up actually is because I think this is a deeply personal topic. I want to acknowledge, I saw some of the questions that many of you asked when you RSVP'd, and they're so important. And so even though we're going to talk about a lot of different frameworks and ideas today, the reality is that your personal story matters in that context. And my hope, and I know so many of us probably came hoping to have, okay, what's what's allowed in professionalism, what's okay, what's not okay. And part of what I think we're going to offer you today is this idea that even the concept of professionalism sort of began with this idea of what's right, what's wrong, what's in, what's out. And when we start to think in an intersectional way, which is what we're going to talk about, it doesn't necessarily, it's not an exact set of answers. And so to expectation set for us, I hope everyone listening knows, we're hoping that you don't leave with an exact set of answers, but better questions to be asking yourself, to be asking your community, and to be asking your company and where you work. So we can go ahead and proceed and dive into the next slide here. So yeah, be sure to hold on to what you put in the chat to the end and think about how it all connects. We'll circle back. And I'm going to hand it back over to Mariah.
Thanks, Ashley. So first and foremost, like I mentioned, I want to define this concept for us so that we have a common ground and common understanding before we dig into some of the deeper frameworks that we discussed. So when we're defining professionalism, we're talking about the conduct, the qualities and standards that distinguish a profession and that professionals must abide by. And really what that looks like in practice is the taken for granted dress. So whether you're expected to have business casual or business professional, the speech, how you're supposed to speak, what proper vernacular you're supposed to employ, and then behavioral patterns as well, which includes timeliness and how we conduct meetings, et cetera. And that's all well and fine. As Ashley and I talked about, and we'll talk about more, we don't actually have a problem with the idea of decorum or the idea that there are certain practices that we engage in at work and that we engage in elsewhere, and we don't like to mix the two. That's fine. The problem comes in when we think about the history, which I'll get into a little bit, and the idea that how we present ourselves, so that concept of professionalism often ends up being used as a proxy for competency. So it's not just that I'm dressing a certain way, but that you take how I dress to mean that I'm able to do my job. And the fact that I speak a certain way makes you think that I'm intelligent and that I have certain abilities and certain qualities about myself. So this type of translation from just my dress and my speech to competency begs a few questions, namely, who sets these standards? Are they necessary? And should we change them, especially as the workplace changes, especially as we move, just thinking about to a virtual workplace? Should these standards be disrupted? So before I dive more into the history of professionalism, I want to talk about the concept of intersectionality and identity itself. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that the intersectional theory actually was developed by a Black woman, Kimberly Crenshaw, and she did so in order to acknowledge the invisibility that Black women often experience, as we are, they say, all the women are white and all the Black people are men. So as a Black woman, you stand at this position, and when you walk into a space that is supposedly created for women or constructed for women, it's really constructed for middle-class white women. And then when you go into all Black spaces, oh, it's really constructed with Black men in mind. And so occupying these intersections, these different spaces that aren't necessarily normative or align with the racial hierarchy or the gender hierarchy, we have to begin to perhaps challenge, critique, and disrupt some of those normative ideas. So it's not just that I'm in this space as a woman, but I'm in this space as a Black woman. I'm in this space as a Black middle-class woman with a certain level of education. All of those elements come into play in how I exist in the world and how I would like to show up in the workplace, but maybe I don't always have that opportunity.
I do want to cut in here and let you ladies know what the women in the chat and the people that are watching are saying.
Thanks. Yes.
Someone said, I do not feel like I could be my authentic self at my last job. Had to seem like I was younger or more conventional. Other people are saying they're here for tips on work-life balance, of just like juggling it all and trying to bring your authentic self to work while you're doing all of that. Another person said, I do not feel like the aspects of myself are valued at work, and I want to understand how we could get our workplaces to appreciate undervalued aspects. One last one, I left the workforce because I had 2 under 2 and I was sinking. Since then, I've been struggling to re-enter. Of course, COVID didn't help, but all of those things playing into identity and at the workplace. So I just wanted to say that the chat is buzzing and there's a lot of people here, and those are the reasons why they are here.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to keep bringing us some of that input from the chat. I don't know if y'all know this, but we can't see the chat, so it's helpful to have those interjections. We don't take them as interruptions at all. It's helpful for us to know what you're thinking, how you're processing this information, and what you're already bringing to the table. I've definitely experienced, trying to shut off or be a more palatable version of my Blackness in a all white workspace, or shutting down certain beliefs or expressions of myself so that I could get the job done, so I could get my paycheck. And that's a huge reality that we want to address and continue to talk about and answer questions about throughout this presentation. So thank you for your input. Ashley, did you want to add anything to that?
Not a bit. I think for the mamas looking for some work-life balance stuff, we're going to hit on that in the second half for sure. Okay. So stay with us.
Perfect. So, I guess you're already doing that. I want to make sure that throughout we're taking opportunities to pause and share in the chat what we're thinking, how we're processing the information. So if there's more chats that you want to share at this time, feel free. But obviously, like I said, we're going to be doing that throughout. So let's talk about the history. We have to contextualize these terms. They can seem a bit innocuous or no big deal. Why are we really even concerned about the idea of professionalism? But when we contextualize them in the history, it helps us to really understand what it means, how it's impacting us, perhaps some of the exclusionary elements of it, and to understand what we're going to be sharing, which is the connection of professionalism to white supremacy culture, actually. So imagine with me, if you can, a workplace in probably, it wasn't even that long ago, in the 50s even, a workplace that is just white men, a workplace that is homogenous racially and gendered. And in that space, work standards of professionalism are set with white men preferences and perspectives in mind. Now, not only is it just a workplace for white men, but as other demographics begin to join that workforce, they join the workforce in still replicating gender and racial hierarchies. So the most powerful positions in the company are still operated or occupied by white men. And then you have women who are secretaries, and you have people of color who are custodial staff, or the people in the workplace with the less power. And each role has its set of standards, its expectations with dress, and there's a block, there's an inability to move up the social ladder, which is this American promise, this American dream of social mobility in the workplace where this professionalism is enacted. There's that inability to even move upwards. And so when we think about white supremacy, we also often think about, obviously, the violence of this week and those type of examples, those type of expressions of white supremacy. But less often do we think about just the exclusionary standards set during a time where white supremacy was normal and normalized and accepted, even in the workplace, where you could make jokes and you can make sexist comments or grope a woman or make her feel uncomfortable or belittle someone on the basis of their identity. And it still happens today, absolutely. But there are more policies in place and more expectations that those type of behaviors won't take place. So we're constructing these standards of professionalism on the basis of white supremacy culture, on the basis of white and male preferences, and they're inherently exclusionary to other identities. I think there are some other things in the chat. Perhaps I'm getting a notification.
I think everyone is just talking about how they could just work on themselves and how to be their best selves at work, and how to add that professionalism when they're dealing with all these other things coming at them. So still that same sentiment of like why they're here, and how like this is going to help them just be their better selves at work.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to continue to explain how these standards were set so that we couldn't express our full intersectional identities. And then we want to talk about how we intend to disrupt this culture and give us opportunities to, for ourselves, decide how we want to show up in the workplace and how to do that. So I want to talk about Aisha Gray's work. She wrote this amazing article, The Bias of Professionalism Standards. One of the key things she says in it is, in the workplace, white supremacy culture explicitly and implicitly privileges whiteness and discriminates against non-Western and non-white professionalism standards related to dress code, speech, work style, and timeliness. So it's not just that we expect a certain standard of work or you getting your job done. No, we expect that for you to behave and assimilate and navigate whiteness in a specific way, reflected through your dress code, your speech, and your work style. Another fantastic criticism and understanding of professionalism and white supremacy is Shahamat Udin's work. He says it's not just that they're asking us to do something or behave in a certain way, but they're asking us not to do certain things. So professionalism is asking Black people to not speak African American vernacular English and instead to code switch and to white accessible dialects. It's asking non-white people to hide their culture dress and instead purchase clothes they will only wear in interviews. So it's not just setting the standard for how we should behave, it's implicitly saying, don't behave like this. Take off your identity and step into a workplace identity and a white identity of whiteness and white maleness and be professional. Do your job that way. And we really want to disrupt and challenge this idea. Lastly, Brahmi Baharan talked about how he, for years, tried to find a more Anglo-Saxon way to say his name or a nickname to come up with, because whenever he introduced himself, people would immediately, struggle or stutter to say his name and ask if he had a nickname. So even those type of identity expressions, my name, I can't even have my name in the workplace. And he writes, the need for professionalism is often attributed to fostering a respectful culture or promoting the image of the organization. However, in reality, this only pushes Black people, Indigenous folks, and people of color to conform to white standards. The idea of professionalism exists to uphold white-dominated workplaces and covertly discriminate against Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color. So what does this mean? This means that in the workplace, intentionally or explicitly and implicitly, there's a constant undermining of non-whiteness and representations of non-whiteness. And the problem with this is it makes your work and your success not about your competency, your skill, or your ability to do your job effectively, but about your ability to navigate and assimilate to whiteness. And that piece is harmful. We want to refocus and challenge the idea that professionalism has to be about or associated with whiteness, and instead offer an idea that we can show up in our intersectional identities and still do our job effectively. So I want to ask, what parts of your identity feel hypervisible in the workplace and what parts feel invisible? So as people share in the chat, I just want to share that once upon a time, I had a huge afro. And I always wore my afro. I was very proud of it. It was just my hair. It's how my hair grew. And it wasn't a big deal. Yes, she shared her afro, love it. It was just how my hair grew. It wasn't that big of a deal. But when I started working, it became a huge deal. People would be touching it and making comments about it. If I braided my hair, they'd be like, where's your crazy hair? And so my hair and my racial identity was always hyper visible in the workplace, and not in a comfortable way that helped me to allow me to show up as my full self, but in a way that made me want to hide, honestly, in a way that made me want to cut my hair. That's not the reason I ultimately did. But I did want to change and shape shift to be a little less visible, actually, when it came to certain identities. And there are other parts of my identity that felt more invisible, honestly. And perhaps in my hypervisibility of my hair, my ability to express my Blackness became invisible as well. So I don't know if people are sharing in the chats in your responses to what feels hypervisible or feels invisible, experiences of microaggression, even just the discrimination that takes place where against people who who wear their hair certain ways.
And if there's a delay still, we can keep moving and come back. Yep, okay, got it. Mm-hmm. All right, so I think this is the part where I'll jump in. And I think, every time you share, Mariah, I feel like I learn a new level, a new layer of this. And it was really important for us to start in the place of looking at not just the history and the research around this, but really understanding again where some of these impressions we have around identity and professionalism come from. We have to start there. But you might be listening to this and going, okay, so when do we get to the part where we get to show up and show out? What does this look like in our everyday lives? How do we make this real? And part of what I would suggest is that we are actually in a really rare moment in history where we are defining that for ourselves in real time right now. And so part of what I want to do is actually return to this concept of intersectionality for a moment. I'm going to give you some examples from my own life that I think will be really useful. So we're going to start here. This actually is Allison Crino. She's one of our fantastic coaches. And yes, she is changing a baby's diaper in this picture. And yes, this is a business meeting. And yes, this is part of what we do at Chicago Career Consulting. We can go to the next slide. So as you can see, we had runaway baby. Then we caught the baby, right? You can see me laughing here. Here we are talking about this. And then the final part of this, my favorite part was when when the other kid got involved, got in front of the screen. And then, you can see she's got one wrestling the other. I know someone out there mentioned that they had 2 kids. It was just an overwhelming experience. And so part of what I want to suggest, we're going to hit actually on one more slide here just to kind of show the fun and the silly here. We've got the classic removing the earpiece, taking the earring out. And even in the middle, Allison is nursing in one of our meetings. Now, I have to tell you, I did not take these pictures for this presentation, okay? This is actually just part of our lived experience and part of how we have intentionally built culture in the context of our work. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge this because obviously this is not possible in all workplaces, right? Maybe my friends in the medical field might say, I can't do that while I see patients. Fair, maybe that's fair. But the reality is that this is not taking away from her competency or her ability to do the job. This does not take away from her ability to be a fantastic coach or to meet all expectations of the work, right? So what we have to do is to find ways to take a step back and go, where have we applied or misconstrued our conception of what professionalism is based on the history, and how do we reinvent that today? So the next slide that I'll share is I want to share 2 stories of some intentionality. Really, this is part of where we find the answer of this. I want to share a story, of a previous boss and mentor I had. Again, I can't take credit for some of these things. It's the privilege I've had of engaging with some really wonderful people in my life. So I had a boss. Her name is Phyllis. We'll call her Phyllis for our purposes today. And she actually came on to a workplace that I was already in. So I was there first, and then she came on as a boss. I'll never forget the first week there. We were all in a meeting, and she picked up the phone. And it was maybe 3:30, middle of the meeting, said, "Pardon me, I need to take this. Hello. Yes. Okay. And who did you sit by at lunch? And okay. And well, he needs to learn to play nicer next time. Well, you got to tell him that. Okay. I expect your math homework to be done when I get home. All right. And okay. Put grandma on the phone. You guys good? Did you get a snack? All right. See you later. 3:30 every day, like clockwork. She made a point to take that call. And I'm going to get to the chats here in a moment, but I'm going to finish this story first. Part of what I think is so important here is that, once we were comfortable with each other a few months later, I went back to her and I said, what made you do that? Because I was nervous at first for you. I was nervous that people were going to perceive you as unprofessional. And she made the comment to me and said, that was a very intentional choice. And let me tell you why. I have not always had the opportunity to take calls like that at work. That was not always something that was part of my reality, but it should have been. I should have been allowed to, but I was not. And so it's part of my responsibility now that I'm in a place where I have more influence, to make this better for the people who come after me. It's also crucial that my colleagues look around me and understand that as a woman, I bring other responsibilities. And that, in fact, not just as a woman or as a Black woman, but that all of us have other responsibilities that we need to be attending to and thinking about. Now, that is a powerful story because, again, she was shaping culture as she went. And I also think it's powerful because it also recognizes that this answer of professionalism is not the same at every point in your life. And we'll talk more about that at the end, but there are times in our careers where that's not possible. Maybe we're in a workplace that doesn't have that culture. And so really, this is about contextualizing what does this mean for us in every given moment. Now, before I hit to, or every given part of our careers, before I get going and get into the next story, because I love telling stories, I want to take a pause and hear, is there anything in the chat that we think is useful to share at this moment that we can kind of just continue to hear about?
Yes. So one of them is never coming across as emotional in the workplace. I think that's something that all women have to deal with, of, that stigma of like, if you speak up or say something, you're going to be pinged as emotional. One that really does come to mind is the angry Black girl, that we feel sometimes like, if I can't say these things, I'm going to be looked at as X, Y, and Z. Another one came in saying, I feel like no one pays attention to me until they need me to solve their problems, even when I forewarn them about what will happen. And I know as women of color, we know that feeling all too well, of like, well, I told you so. So that is kind of what's been buzzing in the chat, of like situations that have happened, that they feel, deemed that if they say something, they're going to be called X, Y, and Z, or emotional, or whatever.
I think that just really demonstrates how our identities are often not welcomed, right? Which is why the story I shared about Phyllis is so powerful, because she was making an intentional choice to welcome parts of herself. Mariah, I think you wanted to say something. I want to let you share that before I go on with the next story.
There's so much history rooted in that. I can't be emotional as a woman in the workplace, even though men are often emotional in the workplace. They express anger and they express, all these different emotions that are acceptable. But the idea of me crying or anything like that in the workplace is completely looked down upon. So it's rooted in this white masculinity of, you can express certain type of emotions, these are appropriate emotions and these are inappropriate emotions, and it's masculinized and it's feminized in harmful ways.
I know that some of you may be hearing this as we're getting into this content, and it may feel like both a good and like almost like pain, right? Because you're thinking your workplace doesn't feel this way though. And so I think this next story will demonstrate exactly what we're talking about here in the chat and with intentionality and what you just shared, Mariah. The other story I have is another situation with a different supervisor who was several levels ahead of me, came on to the workplace and saw me in the hallway and said, I want to invite you into my office. I need to share a strategic priority with you. So I was kind of nervous. Here I am going to the corner office. Okay, strategic priorities. Here we go. I walk in. She opens up a drawer and says, "This is the toy drawer." I said, "What?" "This is where the toys are. I need you to know that when your children visit, they are welcome to come play in my office." Okay, that's different, right? That was different than the previous person. And she had made the comment, part of what's so important is to allow people the opportunity. She was in a very senior level leadership role. And so part of what she was saying is, I am shape-shifting our culture as I go. And that's something that doesn't have to happen only at a senior level leadership. It happens in many different ways. But these are just two examples of what it is to continue to look at that continuum. So we're going to go ahead and keep moving for time's sake, because I know we've got a lot to keep sharing. I want to save time for questions at the end. But really, these stories sort of demonstrate this question back, and it goes back to, can we reframe and can we reclaim professionalism, right? So now that we've associated all this kind of negative history, can we reclaim it? Can we reframe it? I think this next slide will actually give us some really good push-pull on this concept. So this quote is come from an anonymous person. This person identifies as Latinx. This person identifies as gender non-binary, would consider themselves, or they prefer to use they, them pronouns. And so this is how they responded to the question about professionalism. I feel like for me at this point, the term professionalism doesn't serve me anymore because it's so consistently a thinly veiled attempt to mask racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, xenophobia. At the same time, I do have boundaries of how I represent myself in the way I talk and dress and act in workspaces. So I feel like I need a different way to think about or talk about these boundaries in a way that is actively challenging me to be anti-oppressive, as opposed to using professionalism, which is so steeped in white supremacy that it's not even worth trying to redefine the word at this point. Now, that's a really powerful statement. And let me tell you, Mariah and I really talked a lot about this. And I think one of the things that's really important that from me today is that my goal is not to say, oh, we got to throw everything out, right? The goal is not to say, oh, you better all sell your business suits and everyone get rid of your high heels. To be truthful, I mean, Mariah and I both said, like, we like a good pump. We like a good heel, okay? So that is not the point of this presentation. What the point, though, is to recognize where professionalism has historically been exclusive and where it currently makes people feel excluded. And what does that do in your workplace? And how can we bring a greater level of awareness and intentionality to that? And so for those of you in the workplace, again, I'm not saying suddenly change every dress code you've ever had. What I am saying is apply this new lens. Look at your context in a new way and ask, who are we harming in this process? Are we harming anyone, or are things fine? Start asking better questions. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. So as we're asking better questions, as we're thinking about how can we shape shift and re-envision this new creative reality that we hope for, I think we need to also stop and ask, but what about class? What about privilege? What about the realities of restrictive workplaces? Again, these are big topics. We're here for 30 minutes. Obviously, we could give hours and hours of classes on this. But what I'll say here, I want to share two quick things. One, I think the realities of a restrictive workplace, I would be remiss if I just said, oh, okay, everyone tomorrow go in and just tell everyone I'm not doing this or that anymore. That's not our reality sometimes. I think this is really well demonstrated by the story of Chastity Jones. If you're unfamiliar with her story, this happened back in 2010. This young woman, identifies as Black. She received a job offer. When she accepted it, they asked her to cut her braids or her dreadlocks, I believe. And when that happened, they rescinded the offer. She took this to court. And when I first read it, I thought, I'm so glad she took it to court. Hopefully, justice will be served. This went on for years, all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it was struck down. That woman did not get that job back. Okay, and so I share that because I think it's very important that we take this hopeful, creative vision of what can be and put it solidly in the place of where we are and recognize that we are still defining this. I'm hopeful that by the end of our presentation that we can chat in ideas of where we have found a way to show up and show out, that you could share more stories like my friend Phyllis or the other person I shared, because we are the ones who are creating this new reality every day. I'll also kind of end this part by saying that part of what's important for you to know about my own identity, I really relate to this. As it relates to class, I identify both as white and Latinx, but I also grew up in what some might call an under-resourced environment, or some might say underprivileged. I like to say what my grandmother always said, which was, we were poor folk. But I think part of why I even went into the world of career and leadership development is something internally in me had knew that I had to internalize this invisible set of rules to be able to navigate the world, to navigate the workplace. And so part of why I share that with you today is I think it's important to note that, I've never had the option to just not work or to tell my boss, I don't care what your opinion is. I have had to make sacrifices at certain points. because of people I need to provide for, right? And I recognize so many of us listening may feel that tension. And so again, part of my hope for you is that that you will give yourself the ability to look at things in a new way and to recognize, where is my sphere of influence? Is this something that I'm able to influence in small ways in the reach I have? Do I have a larger scope of influence? Do I have to say, this actually is something I have to put on pause because I need to get that paycheck? There's not one right way to approach this. But what is important is that we continue to call this out in a way that allows us to envision what could be, so that we can show up as women, so that we can show up as our full intersectional identities and all that that means at work. So I'm going to go ahead and hand that over, I think, from there to Mariah.
Thank you, Ashley. That was great. I was listening very intently, and I completely agree. How we show up is dependent on so many different things, not just our identities, but our priorities. If my priority is this check, like I need this job, I need to take care of myself, I need to take care of my family, then I'm going to do what I have to do, and we can't disregard that aspect of it, that reality of it. But like you've said so many times, workplace cultures are constructed. They're created. They're not natural, and they're constructed by the structural, the policy aspect. They're constructed by the relationships. They're constructed on the individual level as well. And so I wanted to give these 3 approaches for how to move forward and think about next steps. Again, this will have to be thought of in the context of your own situation. And I know when you're seeking a job, the work you have to do will be different versus if you're actually in a job right now where we're experiencing some of these tensions. We've talked several times about asking better questions or asking the right questions. I think that comes into play in the interview process, asking about workplace culture, asking about the ways in which your company is actively embracing and engaging and creating equitable workplaces for diverse people. But when you're actually in the workplace, I was thinking about the structural things, the workplace policies, even about the Crown Act, which in 2020 was enacted in California and New York. And so the Crown Act says you cannot be fired or discriminated against on the basis of your hair. Now, it doesn't seem like we should need to say that, but as we've talked about the professionalism, the history of professionalism, the context, the association with white supremacy, the privileging of expressions of whiteness, and the denigrating and harm to expressions of non-whiteness, we need acts like the Crown Act to give me the right to wear my hair in a way that it grows or in a protective style. Someone shared that their workplace was all abuzz because she did braids over the summer and had that as a protective style. Things like that shouldn't be going on. So we can approach these things from a structural thing. We can fight for the Crown Act to be enacted across all 50 states. We can fight for changes in workplace policies, again, depending on our role and position in the workplace. We can even call out and engage on the interactional and interpersonal level. How do we relate to each other in the workplace? What are we witnessing in the workplace? Are people making jokes about the Kung flu and the China virus and things like that? Are we just letting it pass? We cannot continue to be silent about workplace cultures and expressions of workplace cultures that uphold white supremacy and harm others. And then, of course, the individual level. I think it's important that we reflect, self-reflection and self-examination. How do I want to show up in the workplace according to my priorities and according to my intersectional identities? If I'm being honest, my workplace has been really welcoming of who I am as a Black woman. But I honestly don't always want to talk about current events going on with Black people in the workplace. Sometimes I just want to do my job. And I don't want to have to emotionally process everything I saw on the news. That's just not what I want. And I appreciate them giving me the space to do it sometimes, but sometimes I'm just like, guys, I just want to do work today. So we get to choose, and we have to choose, even if that culture is accepting of that, we get to decide, do I really want to be, do I really want to engage and activate those identities in this space? Or do I just want to do my job and be allowed to do my job and be allowed to be seen as the competent person and worker that I am? So these are kind of just 3 approaches that I've used. For example, not at Chicago Career Consulting, but in my job at Loyola, I've helped develop their anti-racist policies and their anti-racist protocols, their anti-racist statement. So that was a part of me engaging in structurally and change of the workplace that I wanted to see for other people coming after me and for my colleagues and myself. We've also talked about in the workplace, how the language we use and if that's harmful, if it's oppressive, if it's anti-racist or what have you. So I've engaged in some of these things, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A.
And I think we're bringing it here to the end. We're in our last minute or two. And so I just want to kind of end out here. Thanks, Mariah, for sharing about the 3 approaches, because I think that's really where I wish if we could have the second hour, that would be the full blown where we could discuss even so much more. I want to give a moment just to say in the chat, there's a quote that came through, I think that's really quite useful. It says, authenticity comes at a price, and too frequently the price is for our families, our livelihoods, the pay, and the price might be our self-respect or esteem. And so again, part of why I bring that up is just to acknowledge, yes, this is at the intersection of some tension points. And so I think that's really, really well said. So a quick self-check as we're closing out our time. I think as you go out into your workplaces or go into, depending on where you're working at this moment in time, or where you hope you may work one day, if you encounter something and you think, gosh, that feels so unprofessional, take a pause, right? We said we want you to ask better questions. We want you to think in a new way. Take a pause and go, okay, what just occurred? What part of that action actually felt unprofessional? And this is particularly for folks who are in influential or leadership roles. How does this intersect with my own story? What am I not seeing in this situation? And did this prevent that person from actually being able to fulfill the responsibility of their job? Again, we started to develop a definition, a new definition of professionalism, but we took it out because we believe so much you have to contextualize based on your situation. If you're interested in it, it is in the notes and the references that we have at the end. You're welcome to build off of it. But all of these questions can also be flipped. So if you feel like something's happening to you and people are perceiving you as unprofessional, again, going back to that locus of control and saying, well, what just occurred? What part of it was? And if you know that you're in the right, then proceed. If it's in line with your values, it's in line with what you know you need to do, proceed. So I want to make sure we give ourselves some time for the questions. I think we have maybe one more slide here. Yeah, so we've made it to the question time. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'm really eager to dive into how we can keep dialoguing here.
Okay, so one of the first questions that came in from our group was, as women of color, what are some out-of-the-box ways I can support my fellow women of color peers? What are some ways I can educate my white female peers to be a better ally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm of the opinion that, I don't always want to take on the responsibility of educating my white peers, but I know there can be some value in using your personal experiences. So in my experience, and I didn't get to share this story, but one way that I've been able to be an ally to women of color in the workplace is I share an office with a coworker who is Muslim. She's from Lebanon, but she's Lebanese and American. And she asked me when we started sharing the workplace, can she do her daily prayers in our office? And I was like, of course, like that's not going to bother me. Do you want me to leave the office or can I just be quiet? Like, what do you prefer? And we just kind of talked about what would help her best. And so a few times a day, she would pull out her prayer rug and she'd pray, and I would either leave the room or just make sure I had my headphones on or were quiet in that time. And that was just an interpersonal, interactional level of just supporting each other, what we needed in that space, what she needed in that space, and what I could give to her. So I think it really is interpersonally based. I think we have to be in conversation. We used to have a weekly lunch. Interesting enough, all of the graduate fellows were women of color. So we had a Lebanese Muslim woman, we had a Indian woman, we had me, and we had a Hispanic woman. And we'd have weekly lunches where we just were able to build solidarity in that time and talk about things going on and support each other. So I think it's really about connection and being relational and just talking to each other and seeing what each other needs. And that may change. So I don't think there's one answer, but I think there are ways you can do it just by talking and sharing.
I'll just share for those who may identify as white, and especially if this is your first time engaging in any conversation about whiteness, I'm sure you might be kind of going, "Whoa, okay, this is new." It's important to note, like, it is not the responsibility of your colleagues of color to educate you on this topic. It is important to note it is not their role to bring you into that space. There are too many books and articles and wonderful ways to begin that process for yourself. So just a shout out there. Yeah, next question.
Yes. Okay. So the next one is a really good one too, especially for our community. How do you hold true to your identity as a mom when your work environment sees motherhood as a conflict of time and commitment? This person said, I want to balance my dedication and responsibilities as a parent, but also don't want to be seen as unpromotable.
Yeah, that word, unpromotable. Let me just jump in there. I have sat around so many tables where it has dawned on me that not only was I perhaps the only woman, but I was the only woman with children there. I once worked on a team. Well, in fact, that's pretty common. It's a pretty frequent experience I have. And I think that there's a lot of different reasons per se as to why, but this is a tricky one. And here's why I'm going to say it's tricky. I've worked in places where senior level leaders would refer to folks as honey and sweetheart. Okay. So not every culture is perfect. Not every workplace culture is perfect. And so I know what it's like to be living in that state of tension. I think one of the other questions was also about, like, do you call out implicit bias? Yes, you do. But I think it goes back to a few things. And for the sake of brevity, I'll just say there's such a difference between you have to know what you need and how to advocate for yourself in that situation. You have to find a community of people like this that will continue to support you in that process, because it is an uphill battle. I think what's important is just back to the definition that we've offered. This is about your competency, and workplaces need to start accommodating the needs of mothers. Sadly, that's not going to be the case for every place, and you may be working in a place that doesn't see it that way. But there are places that do see it that way. And so I would encourage you to continue to focus on your own personal goal and to not just identify only with the company you're with, and think about yourself as a whole person, as a whole professional, and what kind of life you want to design as a result of that. I could go on all day. We could just talk all day about that. I'll end there.
I know. And it's needed. Those are the conversations that people are especially having right now when everyone was thrown to work from home with their kids.
So much so.
That was just integrated together. So
yeah. And I think there's, on some level, there are some people that will be very hard to convince on that. And I think we have to accept that sometimes. But then we don't accept it for our own lives long term.
Yes, agree. Okay. One question that came in: is it acceptable to address implicit bias head on? I know that, and both of you, Mariah and Ashley, can answer this. Sometimes that's very hard. That's an internal battle, right? To be like, should I say this right now or should I not say this right now? So I'll let both of you answer that one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. And I've done both. I've done the be quiet and do my work. And then I've done the shaking challenge ideas while I'm shaking internally and my voice is shaking. And so eventually I had to leave that job. but I recommend you doing what you feel safe to do. I don't think there is a right answer. And I think that the reality is sometimes I'm too tired to fight every battle. And I just would like my workplace to just be a workplace, and I don't think you should feel shame about that. I think it's very human and real. But I think if you feel like you're in a position to challenge and you feel safe to do that, you should when you're able to. Like I said, in my situation, I was by no means higher level or senior leadership, but I had been promoted to a role. And I was being undermined in that role in order for them to produce an event that was clearly racist and clearly inappropriate and harmful to my community, Black communities. And so I had to say something, and I was shaking. This was my boss's boss that I was talking to, and it did not come out perfect, but I spoke up finally. And I remember walking home that day from work, still shaking and still just upset. Like I was angry that I had to say something. I was angry that it was even happening, but I was glad I did say it. And then after that time, I started looking for a new job. I immediately started looking for a new job. I eventually put in my 2 weeks notice and I was out because I saw it. I could not fully exist in that space, definitely not long term. So my answer is yes, no. My answer is you have to do what's right for you. My answer is you have to choose each moment. You have to decide in each moment how you want to show up and what you want to say and what you feel comfortable doing. So
I love that. Okay,
Yes.
Ashley.
Yeah, no, I nothing. I don't need to add anything else. I agree. It's a challenging situation. Yes, you should feel the freedom to do so. Do we all always feel the freedom to call it out in the moment? No, we don't. So, yeah. Hopefully you can. Hopefully you can find ways.
So we're almost up on the hour, and like somebody just said, an hour really isn't enough time for all of this and to keep the conversation going. If there's one thing you want to leave our audience with today, what would it be? I mean, you guys started this off. It's very timely, as you know, we know, with just the events that happened in Atlanta and just everything that people are going through, whether it's at the workplace, internally, dealing with friends, dealing with family. Like it could go on. So if there's one thing you would like to leave our community with today on just, how to bring their authentic self in the most professional way that they can, but also, being true to themselves.
Yeah. Would you mind if I start, Ashley, and then
Go
you
for
can,
it.
okay, close us out? So one thing I haven't said yet, but that is so important to me is setting professional boundaries. Every relationship in your life has boundaries. Whether you choose to set them or not, it has certain boundaries. And so your work relationships are just like that. You still get to set boundaries. And what's been so helpful for me is to have those clear boundaries. Decide what I will and will not do. Decide the work I will and will not take on, and even having that time of day where I don't check my work email anymore. You send me an email at 7 p.m., with this virtual world, people just be emailing you and texting and calling you. No, you're not doing that to me, because I matter and I value myself and my life way more than I value my work. Even though I think my work is very important, I value my life more and my health and my mental health more. So setting professional boundaries is so important. I know that's contingent upon your role and the different workplaces you're in, but it's been a powerful tool for me to be able to do my work well and be able to be healthy and to be able to love myself and take care of myself and do what I need to do. So I would really recommend, whatever they are, you get to decide what that looks like, but setting professional boundaries is really important.
And then I think I'll just end by, I was so listening intently to you, Mariah. I was going, yes, I agree. So let me end by saying this. Folks who are listening, this is the hill I will die on. This is it. This is the topic. And what I mean when I say that is that the reality is our workplaces don't often welcome who we are and our identities and what that means. And the reality is that needs to change. And there's going to be a long continued road to getting there. But I want to be part of that. And I hope you all do too. I wish I could sit down with one-on-one with each of you, especially the mamas who are saying, gosh, how do I balance work and life? I could talk about that for years, and we will absolutely design ways to continue this kind of conversation for you if you'd like, because I think ultimately this can be an isolating process, and it doesn't have to be. This conversation does not have to, you don't have to feel like you're the only one having it. We want to see workplaces that aren't toxic, that do allow people to be who they are and to still be fantastic at what they do. And so continue to hold on to that light and ask yourself how you can do that today in conjunction with what your priorities are and with what you need. So I'll end there. Thanks so much for joining us. It's such a privilege and honor.
Thank you guys so much for being here and shedding that light on this important topic. For everybody that's watching, if you RSVP'd, you will get a follow-up email with the masterclass that we just did and some resources from our amazing speakers. We can't thank you enough. Like I said, it's so timely. We need to have these conversations, and this is just the beginning. This is step one. So I encourage you all to have these kind of conversations, reach out to communities and places like this that are already, shedding the light and creating these spaces for you to feel comfortable enough to speak up and bring your professional self to work and not feel ashamed of who you are and all the things that come along with you. So thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Mariah. We
Thank
appreciate you
you.
so much. Everyone for watching, thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. And we will see you next time. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.